Okay guys, we're live here from the roof of HQ in New York City. And of course we have Trish with us in Boston. And we have Charles Ortel, very special guest. Lovely to have you again, Charles.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Good to see you here, Charles.
Nice to see you, George.
I wish it was under better circumstances, of course. We're here to discuss the very strange passing of Peter Smith. Now, you were dealing with him directly the day he died, the day before he died?
It turns out I had been dealing with him since about the summer of 2015. By dealing, I just been speaking to him and interacting with him on the internet, emails back and forth. But in the very small world department, I retain most of my emails. So I went back when I discovered that apparently now it's a suicide, not natural causes. I got that word on, I think, Thursday night, and I couldn't believe it because I was very satisfied, as you both know, with an explanation, as were most people, that it was natural causes.
Right.
Suddenly it's suicide. So I went back in the last 2 days or so, and I've looked through all my emails, and I've confirmed that, in fact, on May 4th, 2017, Peter Smith sent me the email that he interchanged back and forth with Shane Harris, and he sent an email to me encouraging me to speak to Shane Harris on May 4th.
And Shane Harris being the writer for the Wall Street Journal.
Right. And so I followed up with that. It turns out now we know from this latest Chicago Tribune piece that Peter was in Rochester, Minnesota on May 4th already. He'd gotten there around then or maybe the next day. And so there was several emails back and forth, but I checked again on May 13th, the day before he died, at around 1:10 p.m. His time. Let me make sure I get that right. Around, let's say it's around 1 o'clock. I reached out to him and he didn't answer, but then he called back at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
So I got that wrong, I'm sorry.
No problem.
At around 5 o'clock I reach out to him. At 5:36 or so, he calls me back on the 13th, we speak for 25 minutes. And it was a very, as I said before, it was a very matter-of-fact discussion. He was a little off of his game in the sense that he wasn't sharp as a tack as he normally is, or was.
And he's a man of 81 years of age.
And I didn't know his age at that point. I would have guessed he was in his late 70s, but I didn't know his age. And so we talked about myriad topics, and they were all topics of things that I was suggesting that he look at more carefully, because he knew a lot of people. He was connected in Chicago, so we could talk about those details if you want.
You mean with regard to the Clinton investigation?
Right. I wasn't taking directions from him. I was just bringing him up to date on the things that I thought were important, the things I discovered.
Right.
And at no time did I seek, get, or ask for any sort of compensation or opportunity to work with him or for him. I am my own person.
Right.
And but I liked his experience, and he had interesting perspectives. I was happy to listen to him, and so we talked about a few specific things that I felt were very important that involved people in Chicago. So I can talk about this if you want or not.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them was there's a man called Fred Eichner, Eichner, and Fred is a prominent Democrat who has given a lot of money to the Clintons over the years and to Democratic causes. He also happens to be gay, and he's a big supporter of excellent causes, trying to help gay people in the arts in all sorts of ways. But what I was explaining to Peter, and I talked to him about this for some time, that Mr. Eichner's charity is what's called a private foundation.
Right.
And a private foundation is not a public charity. It's different. The rules on private foundations are very strict, that you have to follow the purpose you said you were going to do. You can't set up a private foundation to help people in Illinois and a neighboring state and then start sending money to a charity based in Little Rock to, in theory, fight HIV/AIDS in China, when that charity is not authorized to do that work, to control that work from Little Rock, not organized to even do that purpose,
Right.
and certainly not organized in China.
And this came up in our previous conversations.
Right. But I was on that phone call with Peter. I was taking him through the fact that, look, Mr. Eichner is in deep trouble, and I suggested to Peter that you should go talk to him and explain. I already have reached out and I've gotten nowhere, but Peter being prominent in Chicago, I felt he could go to Eichner and say, listen, the game is up. you have given a lot of money. You're listed as, maybe 10, 25 million to the Clinton Foundation. It was never organized properly. As this unwinds, he will be hurt because his own foundation, if the IRS were to be run fairly and objectively, and in particular, the state of Illinois, which is in such bad shape financially and is going to raise its income taxes, I mean, this is a case where Fred Eichner, can stop talking about inequality and start making, things a lot more equal by paying one heck of a lot of taxes. The penalty here would not just be on the gifts that he made to the Clinton Foundation. An aggressive IRS, for the benefit of all of us, could go in and say, listen, you were never a charity, and therefore all this extra money, we're going to tax you, corporate income tax. What did you do? When did you find out? Did you do any investigation about whether or not this was a real charity? Because if you didn't, the penalties are even more severe. So that level conversation, and even in more depth, was what I was having with him. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'll get right on that. When I get back, I'm."
So this is right at the time of his death. That last phone conversation you were talking about, the Eichner Foundation.
Well, this is the day before his death.
Before his death.
So the 1 o'clock thing I was remembering. It's been a long couple of times. The 1 o'clock thing is that he died at 1:17, I believe, according to the Chicago Tribune, on the 14th, 1:17 p.m. local time. Okay. This conversation that I had with him was the preceding day at 5:36 my time, the 13th in New York, which would have been 4:36 his time. And the records in the first Chicago Tribune piece claim that one or more canisters of helium were purchased at a Walmart at, I think it was 12:53 his time that day. So either he didn't go and somebody else got the stuff for him, or he had been out there buying this stuff, which I think is odd to begin with.
I mean, isn't that crazy?
Right.
Helium? Doesn't it come in huge, heavy containers? Is someone really buying helium?
I mean, I have a hard time relating to it. I mean, I'm somebody who doesn't like to buy anything. I don't like stores to begin with. But, I can't tell you the last time I've been into anything other than a grocery store.
Where would you even get helium from?
Well, he got it at Walmart. And then you look into the Walmart, or it was purchased at Walmart according to the Chicago Tribune. So I checked yesterday and I said, where's this place? The hotel, and where there are two Walmarts. They're both pretty far away. So if he did it, he had to go out there. And then what do? You go into Walmart, and it's not like, every Saturday in May there's a 2-for-1 sale on helium.
It comes in big, heavy tanks, doesn't it? It's compressed gas.
Right. I mean,
and he's an old man. He's carrying heavy tanks
or somebody went with him. So the question is, or somebody procured these and he had nothing to do with them.
Why not just jump off the roof of the hotel?
I don't know. But the thing that really got me going when I saw that story was to say, now wait a minute. Somebody had purchased this helium before he spoke to me, hours before he spoke to me. And I can assure you that in our conversation there was no sign of, whoa. Now I did push him a little bit because he wasn't as sharp as he had been, and he had been not evading me, but generally when I called, he'd call right back, and he wasn't doing that. And so I asked him in the middle of this, after I got a little bit further with Eichner, I said, Peter, I got to ask you, are you okay? And he said, well, I've been dealing with some problems at the Mayo Clinic. And then we had a conversation about how my grandmother worked there a long time ago.
Some health problems, personal health problems.
Yeah, so I figured, okay, he's a wealthy guy. He's going to a great place to get some treatment. And, so then we launched into this discussion of the Obama Foundation. Because he was asking me what else is new. And I said, well, look, I've been looking at this Obama Foundation for a while. I know Robert Wolf. I've run into him a few times. I mean, I don't know him well, but I ran into him a few times. And we got into a discussion in a Fox Business green room about, the Clinton Foundation, and that he allowed as he was a trustee. And I told him months ago, I said, you got a problem, bub. The Obama Foundation is not organized properly. It is, it's supposed to house presidential records, and it's been set up, I think, illegally. Of course, it sailed through because you had Holder and then Loretta Lynch and other people overseeing the Justice Department, the IRS. We all know how rigorously we feel they do things these days. And so I said to this trustee, I said, look, you got a problem. And there's an email interchange back and forth with him. And he said he would forward my concerns to the board and his lawyers, and maybe he did. So what had happened since that point is that there was an announcement in the press that Barack Obama was going to go speak over in Scotland at a conference. And it was going to be at this Hunter Foundation conference, which is a joint venture partner with the Clinton Foundation, and it too has problems. So I was saying to Peter, do you know any other trustees of the Obama Foundation? Because you really need to alert them. Barack Obama better not go to that conference. That's a very bad idea for him. And I'm not in the business of giving advice to Barack Obama, but I do feel that he is an historical figure, and his presidential foundation should be properly organized. He should have one, and he's not being served. So we started talking about that, and he said, well, look, I got this good friend, I think it's John Rogers, who runs something called Ariel, Ariel Investments. And Peter was telling me, I know him well, and I can go over and see him. I said, well, you need to go see him and warn him that all of the people who are on the board of the Obama Foundation are in serious trouble because they have broken the rules in running this thing, and they're out there fundraising, and they're fundraising illegally. And we'll see what happens. But my suspicion, I was telling Peter, is that eventually Donald Trump will get control over the IRS, will put fair-minded and objective people in there. There will be a really, really serious investigation of all kinds of foundations, an updating of all these laws, and they're going to get tagged. And so that was that kind of discussion in more depth. I could bore you in more depth, but Peter was fully engaged, and he was like, this is great, not great in that there's misery involved for other people, but this is helpful, let me think about it, please keep me in touch, keep up the great work. It wasn't, well, woe is me, I can't really talk, Charles, I got these problems and that. I mean, he was energized, and we shut down the phone call after about 25 minutes or so.
So your feeling is he was in a normal state of mind?
Absolutely, and he was talking also about this Shane Harris guy. He said, look, I want to encourage you to reach out to Shane Harris, make sure you do that. Peter told me he struck me as a decent, fair-minded guy, maybe left-leaning, but nonetheless fair. And Peter, I have the email. Peter said, I told him all about your Clinton Foundation work. And so all this happened on the 13th of May. And then I then got an email, I think on the 16th of May, from a mutual friend that I'd been introduced because of all this in Chicago, saying, sorry to tell you that Peter died, which came as kind of a shock. And with that, I said, all right, well, I'm not going to, I didn't know his family, and I didn't want to be a burden, so I just sort of withdrew. And the next time it came up was the first time I met you guys. Yeah, when I got a phone call from Shane Harris.
Yeah. So, and that was about a little more than 2 weeks ago. I'm thinking almost 3 weeks ago now.
It was June 29th or 30th in that time frame.
So it's been a while now, 3 weeks or more. At any point along the way, did you ever feel like, Peter worked for Democrats, right, as well as Republicans? So did you ever get the feeling that he might have been sort of an operative, sort of fishing to see what the other side knew at any point or anything like that? Or
the people,
intelligence gathering? Or
I think it's more the type, and perhaps we all know the type, you're a young person full of whatever in vinegar, and you're out there, you're 20 years old, you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, you're 50 years old, now you're in your 60s. And, your friends are not as active, but you want to be active. And he got to that point, having been a successful investor, and then he got, I think, a lot more interested in politics. And in Chicago, he would explain to me, he said, look, I know Democrats and I know Republicans, I have to. In any big city, there are typically more Democrats than Republicans. So if you're trying to get involved in a big city, you're going to know people in both.
He seemed to me, with the office in the Wrigley Building, I think, looking down over the Miracle Mile and the Chicago River, as kind of a, that's the kind of the publishing world of Chicago. He seemed to be very connected in the publishing world. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, he started out working for the Field family complex.
Owns the Wrigley Building.
And it also owned the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yeah.
And
which was the Trump hotel before it was torn down.
Right. See, I don't know that much history about Chicago. But anyway, so yeah, he was, I believe, reasonably well connected in Chicago. And I was surprised, actually, on the first call from Shane. He said to me, that Shane had done, from the Wall Street Journal, research on Peter, and no one, in quotes, no one seems to know Peter in Chicago. And my reaction to that when Shane said that is, I have my doubts about Shane, frankly, because I have personally spoken with people who are very powerful in Chicago who do know Peter Smith. And before I even got involved, even taking phone calls with him and emails, I satisfied myself that he did have contacts.
Mm-hmm. So now there's this question, and Trish, jump in with financial questions here at any point, being our resident financial expert. But just to this question of potentially how this may play into the timing of all the Clinton machinations in the DNC with
Sure.
the events in the DNC. May of 2016 is a very touchy time. It appears that they know something is happening,
Right.
And then this meeting happens with this Russian lawyer on June the 6th.
Right.
Did he know anything about that? Were you talking at all?
We were not talking about that. No. But let me take a step back, if I may,
Sure.
and suggest that what the Clinton team is doing here is classic Clinton. Right? The real issue here, in my opinion, is not and never has and never will be what happened on June 6, 2016 in a meeting involving Donald Trump Jr. and who knows how many Russians. The real issue is, what did Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett and the Democratic Party know about the condition of the Clinton Foundation by November 16, 2008, when a memorandum of understanding was signed by Valerie Jarrett countenancing the continued operation of the Clinton Foundation and Hillary being Secretary of State? What did they know about the state of the filings? What did they know about the secret email servers? And then what did they agree about these secret servers and secret offices, and about the idea of Hillary Clinton and her team and the Clinton team housing all this government property, off-site the secretaries, outside the control of the real people who could stay in control, boldly against all these serious laws. And I'm not involved in national security, but I read these articles that say, you get top secret clearance and you start taking stuff out of a secure, compartmentalized information facility, SCIF. You start doing that, you're in big, big trouble. They weren't just doing that, they were vacuuming everything, keeping it in various places. We don't know all the different places. They did this while she was Secretary of State, while she and the Clinton Foundation and other people were involved on multi-purpose missions involving rich donors who were gaining economic benefits from what the United States could do in way of opening doors, memorializing all these memos. She does this all the way till February 1st, 2013, and the real story in my mind starts that day, February 1st, 2013. Who allowed her to keep all this stuff? Who did not force her and her team to sign all these papers and understand that what they were signing about, turning over all this property? That's our property. Who allowed that from February 1st, 2013, then as they illegally reorganized the Clinton Foundation, right up through the point where she announced for president, which was April 13th, 2015, and it wasn't until shortly after that, or around that time frame, that this furor arose about the theft and use of our secrets, for the benefit of the Clinton family and the Democrat. That's the real story.
Yeah.
All right. And the stuff about, this Donald Trump meeting, I think we need to investigate it, but we can't let ourselves get into a place where, the Trumps are doing something over here, so let's forget this massive, fleet of elephants over here.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and there's always that. But I'm just trying to drill down on Shane Harris, who's this young up-and-coming reporter down at Wall Street, as you can see in the distance, and he's going to be pushing this narrative that you could see it 2 weeks ago when we first met, or 3 weeks ago when we got the phone call when we were with you. And then the subsequent meeting when we filmed with the Highline, we were talking about this Peter Smith thing, and I was saying, I see it coming.
Right, and you were right.
This is going to be a big narrative. It's going to be a big story. And then they dropped this other information today about the suicide or the helium. So it's really a conundrum right now. It's really in the center of the news.
Right.
So, I'm trying to see if there's any connection whatsoever between the Peter Smith story and any of the other narrative, any of the things you talked about over that year and a half or the year.
Well, so Peter did say, and again, my focus is exposing fraud generally and Clinton Foundation fraud in particular, all the surrounding entities to that. And Peter did say from time to time that, he believed that he was on a way of possibly, getting these missing emails, that it's, possible they're out there, and various people had come to him and said maybe he can get these emails. And
so he mentioned that once or twice.
Many times.
This dark web thing he mentioned
many times. And but my attitude on it was always to dismiss it for three reasons. The first reason is that's not my area. Right? The second reason is that that I want to expose the Clinton Foundation and stay focused on that. But the third and most important reason is one that I think is underscored by my friend, my acquaintance, and Judge Andrew Napolitano, who I think is a prince of a human being, has suffered a little bit on Fox sticking to this story, but he has said that every keystroke in the United States of America since sometime in 2004 is available. And if that is the case,
that's exactly right.
Then I've got to believe that multiple people inside our government already have seen these emails, know what's in there. And because the security was so poor around, and I'm no expert on security, but just what I read, somebody sending a Yahoo email asking, Hillary sending a Yahoo email to Uma Abedin, print this out and put it in the foyer of my mansion in Washington, D.C. I mean, you got to believe that every serious government intelligence agency, when they saw what was going on with this, and they would have noticed it, would have said, well, we can defeat this. So my attitude with that was, Peter, why are you wasting your time on this? The people who matter already have this stuff. And it's not really something that you as an individual should waste your time with. And I personally, I'm not an expert in it. So I'm glad you're doing this, but that's I need to focus on other stuff.
Did you have a question, Trish?
I was going to say Bill Binney, who is a 36-year veteran of the NSA and something of a legend. He wrote the Thin Thread software program for them. But he was saying that all of those 33,000 deleted emails are on NSA servers.
Did you have a question?
That they capture every digital communication.
Bill Binney of NSA.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Bill.
I know of him.
Oh, okay. That he's basically saying the same thing you said.
Right.
Is basically they collect it all. Everything's
Right.
captured. It's stored in Bluffdale, Utah. Have you ever been involved in any kind of FOIA or any kind of trying to get the NSA type information?
Not NSA, but I have made state and federal FOIA requests.
For just different agencies, different government agencies?
Just, from the National Archives, from OPIC, from the state of New York, from the state of California, from other states. I don't want to say everything, but,
So in your opinion, do you think there's a smoking gun here? Do you think, let's just say, that on the odd chance that Peter Smith's death had something to do with political machinations, do you think there is any kind of smoking gun of anything that you may have said to him or discussed that would lead you to that conclusion? Or?
Well, no, I would say this. I think that, so far all I've said about Peter Smith's death is that I don't think we know the whole story yet. I just don't believe we know the whole story. And, I think the public at this point has a right to know what really happened here. I'm sorry for his loss, and I'm sorry for what his family and friends are going through. Perhaps they may have a different view that they don't want the public to dive into this, but, the stories that have been told so far do not make a lot of sense to me. And, I'm not somebody who follows every crevice of the long history of people around the Clinton Foundation who've met an untimely end. But this is not, a first strike here. This is yet another case that reeks. And, in this area, I want to leave it to, trained forensic police experts and so on. I'm just somebody who has an opinion, but I'm certainly not an informed expert on that. On the other hand, the Clinton Foundation record itself, you want a smoking gun, you've got a smoking arsenal in the period from October 23, 1997, when it was formed, right the way through to November 18th, 2004. At no time in that long period was it ever organized or operated properly as it solicited funds. And from February 2002 until November 18th, 2001 rather, February 2001 till November 18th, 2004, the FBI and the Department of Justice were investigating with a seated grand jury, and they had access to all kinds of, and they did subpoena and received all kinds of materials. And they must have put the team of deaf, dumb, and blind on that case because, what's in the public domain, you can see it on the Clinton Foundation website, there's every single donation, but it's not, with respect to 1998, the three major ones, there's no dates on them, so we don't know when they actually happened. But from all the way through 2004, with the exception of 2003, where there's no information, you have enough information to see massive fraud. Solicitation fraud, operating fraud, bank fraud, wire fraud, accounting fraud. It's just right there. And so the real question for me, as I think I've said the first time, is not how big the fraud is, but what do we learn about the system of regulation from the fact that, you know, supposedly the FBI, supposedly the Southern District U.S. Attorney, and the considerable resources they have, you know, have looked at this and haven't been able to bring it to justice.
Well, Charles, as you've pointed out, Mueller and Comey go way back with the Clintons and their foundation. So, you know, given where they are today in their careers, I guess it comes as no surprise that nothing ever came of it.
Well, again, you know, I'm glad for groups like yours and the crowdsource team behind you. You know, it's really time. We know that the mainstream media has downsized its investigative group, so that they have fewer money, fewer engaged minds, fewer open minds, frankly, looking into this issue. I mean, what we really need, instead of training, you know, hours and hours every night on whether Donald Trump Jr. should or should not have taken a 20-minute meeting, I think it's time to go back into the long history of James Comey and Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller, I was just told by somebody I really value, there's a woman named Sidney Powell who's done a great book, License to Lie, talking about all the problems with the fraud investigation of Enron. And portions of it. And portions of it were led by Robert Mueller, right? And so...
And Chris Wray, the new...
Exactly.
was in Enron as well. It's just thick as thieves with Robert Mueller,
Right. And so I think the American public needs to have confidence that in these particularly in complex matters, be they multinational, be they investing, be they charities, that we have the apparatus in place to try to catch these fraudsters. You're never going to catch the great fraudsters, right? It's like their mission in life is to evade all authorities and to concoct ever greater fraud. So you're never going to catch the masters, but you should be able to catch the stumble bumps. And the people who were operating the Clinton Foundation, particularly in the early years, are stumble bumps. Even now they are making mistake after mistake in all these filings, state and federal and foreign. And so we need to go back. I don't know if we have within the Justice Department the ability to do this now that we have this rogue special counsel, I guess he is, with packing his force with anti-Trump people and pro-partisan Democrats with checkered track records.
The rogues gallery of Clinton Foundation lawyers. I mean, it really is. If you look at some of the people, Justin Cooper's lawyer,
right?
If you drill down, the time correlation. I'm big on time correlation. You know, why just June 6th for this lawyer meeting and the modus operandi of the Clinton Foundation seems to be a good offense is best when you as the defense. The case, the Clinton Foundation case, this pay-to-play case, moves from the Southern District of New York down there, SDNY they call it, Preet Bharara, James Comey's old SDNY, over across the river to EDNY, right about that time to Loretta Lynch's old Brooklyn, the Eastern District of New York. And that just seems to be the one thing that happens along with this Russia meeting, this Fusion GPS meeting. Any comment on that? Or?
Well, again, I don't know and have not tried to find out, because you're not really supposed to know exactly what's going on at these FBI and you know, U.S. Attorney investigations. There has been excellent reporting by a number of people. Richard Pollack at the Daily Caller, Mark Tapscott have done great work, and they have suggested that there are actually 4 investigations in various places. I think the Little Rock office, the Washington D.C. office,
Los Angeles, and has one,
and maybe I've also
Washington D.C. and then added
I think there was
here,
an
Miami.
IRS one in Dallas though too.
Oh, in Dallas, you
the
said?
IRS has confirmed that they opened an investigation out of their Dallas office, and I think they confirmed that in either June or July of this last year, 16.
I heard about that during the election.
2016.
Oh, 16.
Yeah,
Sorry.
16.
Right.
So it just seems odd that in the middle of an election, 3 months to go before the voting, a change of venue of the FBI, at least the Hillary's email investigation had started in June of 2015. So a whole year later to all of a sudden change venue from this side of the river to that side of the river just seems odd. It seems almost like a deflection.
Right. I don't know, but I think this area, we can actually marry up the discussion if we want to, talking a little bit about Fusion GPS
Yeah.
and foundations and poorly regulated corporations. So if you're in the money raising
Could you
business,
just explain Fusion GPS? They're implicated in kind of having a slush fund, if you will, to pay different people,
Right.
kind of soft money, if you
Right.
will, soft money
Right.
pack kind of thing.
So like anything else, when people identify a problem, good-meaning people, you mentioned that you were a left-leaning Democrat, and I'm a right-leaning independent, let's just say. Good-meaning people can agree that if we're going to play a serious game, there should be basic rules, right? You don't want to go out to a tennis match and decide in the middle of it that all you need are 4 games, right? You have to have a common objective. So we agree on those rules, and those basic rules are that if you're going to raise money, for a for-profit purpose, there should be rules. For not-for-profit, for a political purpose, and then you said about, well, how do you discipline the actors? You can discipline the people, the corporations, the partnerships. So what emerges out of all this is the clever geniuses who want to evade the rules say, oh, no, we'll create these consulting firms, right? And that's, I think, what Fusion GPS is. It's some mysterious firm, unclear who owns it, where it's actually based. When you set up corporations, especially in this country, you can set up LLCs in Nevada or New York or Delaware, and it's very tough to trace who actually controls these things, because you can look in the articles of incorporation and there could be all these rules, and then there could be a secret letter that says, notwithstanding what's in the articles of incorporation, we hereby agree that this is the way we're going to do it. And now technically that's not legal, but if no one's going to check,
Well, no one even knows it's there.
right, no one knows it's there. So in this area of Fusion GPS, you're in the business of trying, I'm not saying you are, but the Clintons and let's say the Trumps and the Romneys and whatever, they're in the business of opposition research trying to find dirt. Now, how do you do that? How do you pay for it? You employ these shadowy firms. And in addition to that, you have people who are trying to basically buy influence but not get tagged by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, by the Foreign Agent Registrations Act, by other acts. So you create these slush funds. Nobody's really checking. And I have argued that Teneo, that mythical thing that Doug Band has created, a fixer, is a slush fund. And I believe that what Declan Kelly created that preceded that were 2 things. He led something called FD Consulting, which was, I think, basically an influence peddling slush fund that became then D.
Go ahead, Chair.
Center for American Progress, the Podesta.
Center for American Progress with John Podesta. Yeah.
That's I'll talk about that in a second. That's a good one. But you have Teneo to DK Consulting back to this FD, and that's an excuse for people who are trying to increase their political influence to pay to this. Then you get introduced to Bill Clinton, for politicians who want to get something out of a corporation, you put it into the pot. You can claim you wrote a fancy report for a client, no one's ever going to check. There's no regulation. We see in these speeches, for example, nobody sits and says, well, Hillary Clinton for a $700,000 speech is actually going to translate a lost book of the Old Testament. But for $500,000, she's just going to do a new Robert Frost poem in Sanskrit. There's
no scope of work, no milestones, no independent audit, no review.
And that's, to me,
it's total slush.
That is completely obnoxious. Because I'm somebody who has nothing better to do than look at data, and I happen to know how people are paid in this country, and we're highly paid to the rest of the world. But rich people don't earn that much money. The richest families, the top 10%, each earner earns less than $200,000 a year.
Why bother earning money when you can just steal it?
Right, but that's my point. So, but to sit there as somebody who thought she was going to be, or might hope to be, President of the United States and the former president, to sit there and demand, or take $700,000 for the same speech that you just gave somewhere else for got $500,000, and then swan around the world in a flotilla of private jets and suites talking about global warming. At some point somebody's got to say, hang on, this is a bunch of carnival barkers, and we got to stop this, because this crazy land. You can't let this stuff go on.
It's really absurd.
Well, and I think Fusion GPS, each one of these little slush funds seems to have a specific purpose. Fusion GPS seems to be what is known in the business as OPPO, or opposition research against another candidate. It seems like the PP dossier we talk about a lot, you know, where the Trump goes to, you know, the whole story with the, that was paid for by Fusion GPS, you know, hiring this Richard Steele. And then there's linkages through a law firm that I won't mention to this lawyer that shows up in Washington long enough to go into this 20-minute meeting, and then she's overstaying her visa and all sorts of things that don't make any sense. So have you tracked these kind of oppo firms in the past, or you stay more on the foundations?
Well, yeah, I've stayed on publicly traded companies and charities, but I did notice the oddity of Teneo, and I wrote an article about it in Breitbart, that the Clinton's association with Teneo is going to ultimately seriously tarnish the Clinton, if it can be tarnished further, the Clinton brand, because Teneo made the mistake of accepting institutional money from a very big private equity fund that's, I think, headquartered in the UK, but it's backed by the biggest investors in the world. Those are the sovereign wealth funds that, you know, for the big countries.
Barclays and others.
No, that's backed by the government of Saudi Arabia and the government of this, the Norway, that have hundreds of billions of dollars to invest, and you can't get that money easily. You have to. Those funds are so strictly supervised, and they really are careful. And when I saw a private equity fund backed primarily, it's former Barings Capital, it's now called, I think, BC Partners or something like that. They bought a minority interest in Teneo in 2000, I want to say 15. I may have that wrong, but roughly 2015. Now their charter, that's a world I know, their charter was to take majority control, not minority control, majority control of long established big multinational businesses, which Teneo certainly was not when they made their investment. So I saw that, and I said, this is very suspicious. And that caused me then to say, well, who is this Teneo? And that's how I got into Declan Kelly.
I think for people who don't know, Teneo is a kind of a pay-to-play subsidiary within the Clinton Foundation run by Doug Band. No? No, go ahead.
Teneo is run by Doug Band, but it's not a subsidiary of the Clinton Foundation. So,
okay.
Right.
I just meant some satellite orbiting somehow inside the Clinton Foundation financials.
Right. We went there.
Yeah, we went there.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Were you well received?
No.
They didn't let us in.
They didn't let us in.
Almost all the places we go, they don't let us in.
But the idea of being pay-to-play, meaning we'll help you get this lease, or we'll help you get this World Bank loan, or we'll help you get this, but we need to see some cash, that sort of thing.
Well, the best for that, I mean, sometimes, this is why I say these are stumble bumps. The best evidence that I find is in the WikiLeaks, the Podesta WikiLeaks dump, where Doug Band writes a memo trying to justify, react to all the criticisms that have been leveled at him, wherein he confesses to multiple felony crimes. Yeah. If this is a real memo. I mean, it could be a forgery. So far, nobody has said that any WikiLeaks cable is, in Podesta is a forgery. And this memo basically says, you don't understand my value. After Bill Clinton, gave the pardon to Mark Rich, we couldn't raise any money. So I had to raise the money.
Yeah.
And I raised all this money. And
I paid to play with the best.
Yeah, and then it gets better. And then, I helped Bill Clinton make, $90 million, which of course isn't in his tax returns. And, it goes on and on. It's like 7 pages of
12.
Or 12 pages, you're right, 12 pages. And it goes, and the other thing is, if you're a CEO, let's pick on Coca-Cola, just for the hell of it. You're CEO of Coca-Cola, and there are, let's say, still loose controls, and you have to operate all over the world, right? It's tough to maintain control over your bottling operations and the quality of your water and all this kind of stuff. And you're a big company. And you got Warren Buffett as one of your big investors. So you can write big checks to consultants, which it's evident they did, And you can hire Teneo, even though it's not really didn't have a track record when it was created. And you could enter into this contract, and you could overpay them, pay them $5 million, and no one will say anything. Now that's also wrong. I know, I was not involved in that area, but I had my own small investment firm providing some advice. And when you do that, it's not like nobody wants to work for Coca-Cola. right? I mean, most investment firms would be investment banks would love to get an advisor, and to get a $500,000 a year retainer is big, let alone $5 million.
Yeah.
So all of these excess, high-paying, consulting contracts, I think that's an area that really needs to be.
And I think you're referring to Declan Kelly's relationship to Coca-Cola Foundation.
Well, also there's a great book called The Firm about McKinsey, and it talks about under Rajat Gupta, who I believe is an unrepentant criminal, who was the managing partner for 9 years of McKinsey. That's a firm that's been around for a long time, that has done in some cases good work. I've had very unfortunate experiences with them, and this book, The Firm, when you read about, they're trying to cast a good light on Rajat Gupta, but you hear that he went in to Scandinavia, and after he left Scandinavia went bankrupt. And then his team was trying to advise J.P. Morgan, and they suggested you ought to get out of your core business. It's advice that just made no sense. And yet McKinsey was paid tremendous amounts of money. So these large consulting firms, which get corporate secrets, and do they guard them? Do they only act in the interest of the first client, or do they, you create this gigantic swamp that I'm not a fan of regulation. I'm actually a fan of breaking those type of firms up, I don't think you need in this day and age, look at us now, you don't need a big studio, you don't need a massive group and overhead of offices all over the world. You could get some top smart people, 50 of them, and you could have, 500 firms compete against each other, and that will be a lot better, for the market and everybody else. But these big consulting firms and these unregulated accounting firms and unregulated banks and now unregulated charities, it's a disaster.
And of course, McKinsey, with Eric Graveman being the key people to work with Haiti and the Relief Commission, the Haiti Relief Commission, the IHRC, with shares a few initials with Hillary, rather.
That's right. Yeah, no, McKinsey's all over the place. McKinsey in the, I hope out of all this, one of the good things that I hope will come out of this is that people, particularly your wider group, will start ferreting out and taking a look at what I believe is to be the case. We believe that the FDA, the SEC, various regulatory bodies actually work. I believe, in fact, that they don't work. That they create the appearance of, that everything's fine. And in this period back since 1982, where interest rates have steadily gone down and asset values have steadily gone up, it's been a comfortable world. You can make money, you don't need to worry about it. But will come the crash, which is, I think, in process. Who knows when it ends? Bites and ends. I hope we dig more deeply into this and ask ourselves, on things like these big disaster relief missions that attract now hundreds of billions, when you think about all of them, where did that money go? Did it go to the victims, or did it go to the supposed do-gooders and political public services? That's reprehensible stuff. That we should be thinking about as left and right together. And we need to reform that.
Charles, I want to ask you, George is always talking about time correlation, and we've got this guy, is it Eberheim, Trish, what's the Haitian official's name who just died? Eberwein. And so, Peter Smith, suicide. Eberwein, suicide also is what they're saying, right?
Again, my father is fond of saying he's a PhD in nuclear physics. When people talk about coincidences, my father's first reaction is, think of the ones we don't recognize. And so when we think of the numbers of people, first of all, there's 320 million Americans. However many, adult ones do you want to say there are? How many people die? How many people die in a? I don't know that this is a coincidence worthy of, going down a rabbit hole on. But I do know that if we park this to the side and focus on what is out there, that it is evidence that we don't have to ask the Clintons for, we don't have to ask the FBI or anybody for. It's right there. Go to the Clinton Foundation website. Go to ProPublica nonprofit, whatever it's called, Nonprofit Explorer. Then go to the state of New York and the state of California and the state of Illinois, and the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts websites, and you'll get all the evidence you want. It's right there.
Open Secrets and Crypto.
Oh, Open Secrets?
Yeah, a lot of sources.
Did you see Judicial Watch had gotten another group of emails many of which show exactly what you're talking about, Charles, around, the pay to play and her violating the agreement right out of the gate that she made in order to get confirmed around not mixing Clinton Foundation and State Department business.
I didn't get
Yeah,
that.
so Trish, do you have a specific example? Do you have a specific, when were those released?
It was just in the last couple of days.
Okay. The most
Fine.
recent Judicial Watch drop?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So, Judicial Watch has just released on Friday. I think it's 448 pages, heavily redacted in places.
Yeah.
342 completely redacted.
Are they really?
Yeah, all blank.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are
Open secrets.
We're all black, I guess.
right. But these are emails to and from people in the State Department trying to basically get special advantages for many people who turn out to be important Clinton Foundation donors. And I'm glad you bring this up. In the WikiLeaks Podesta dumps in particular, what is noteworthy if you think about them is how many of these emails to Hillary Clinton are, "Oh ma'am, you did such a wonderful job. Let me give you a 14-page summary of all the news articles of your recent triumphal visit to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia," whatever it is. So there's all this stuff. If I were Secretary of State, I would say, listen, I would like to have a department over here of compacting. All this stuff, just put it in the compactor and use it to fertilize the lawn if there is one in front of the State Department. I mean, ridiculous stuff. And then think, this other friend I have, I won't mention his name, he's fond of the Sherlock Holmes story, The Dog That Didn't Bark. All right? And so what we should be thinking about here is you have a team in the Obama administration that comes in January 20th, 2009 and does not really know at that point what the Clinton Foundation looks like. They've been told on November 16th, 2008, Valerie Jarrett signs the MOU saying everything is hunky-dory. The AIDS thing is fine, every piece is fine, it's all the same. Within a week of that memo having been issued, we have in the WikiLeaks thing, a different place, a memo from a woman called Kumiki Gibson directly to Bruce Lindsay saying, "This house is on fire." It is, everything is wrong. And yet at the same time they signed this thing saying everything's great.
Yeah.
And then they bamboozled the Senate. And now January 20th is the first time Barack Obama's in there with his team. It takes him a while to get, how come there are no emails that we've seen yet saying, listen dude, you told us a whole bunch of things that weren't true. What's your response to this and this and this and this?
I always think, as a Democrat, he's this poor character that keeps walking downstairs in the morning after your kids have had a party without your permission and everything is just trashed. And he's like, what did you do? What have you done?
Now, Charles, you were just saying that earlier in the conversation that the Obama Foundation is also being set up totally illegally. This seems to be the standard operating procedure now.
Well, yeah, so the interesting thing about presidential foundations is that they are a special category of charities that actually has a variety of statutes in parallel to the 501c3 statutes that deal generally with charities. This is called the Presidential Libraries Act of 1955, and it was amended in 1986. And that companion statute very precisely defines what is and what is not a presidential archive, right? Now, the Clinton Foundation and the Barack Obama Foundation, when they were first each formed under different jurisdictions, I think the Clinton under Arkansas law and the Obama possibly under DC law, but don't hold me to that. They said they were going to comply with that statute, right? And you put that in the binding language of a charity is in the Articles of Incorporation. That's where you find the meat. That's where they said they were going to do. Well, to do that, there are strict rules, right? You've got to house papers created or received by the senior staff of the executive branch during the precise term when the given president was in office. That's what it's for. And you can, in addition, have a research facility related to it to study that paperwork. It's not a living monument to a president. It's not like, a place where, gee, I never had a house before, and I got all this stuff, and I got to put it somewhere, so why don't I put it in the presidential archive? No, you got to put presidential records, and you got to house them there, and you're housing them there for our benefit.
It's not
right?
self-storage for Barack Obama.
And it's not self-storage, and you're not allowed, even though George W. Bush apparently has an apartment in his, you're not
What?
allowed, you're not, and Bill has a 5,000 square foot apartment in Little Rock.
Well, he's got to have
With a
somewhere to
penthouse.
keep all his girlfriends.
Isn't there a classification though for executive privilege where you could give something that was extremely sensitive, an E5 or E6 type classification from the State Department that would put kind of records on ice for a certain period of time?
Well, again, yes, I don't know that world, but the intent of the Presidential Archive legislation is to make sure that the important records of the executive branch, the key records, will be maintained safely so that scholars and people in the future can understand what and evaluate what really happened. Absent a presidential archive, the National Archives would do this. Right. So you're saying, what question, or might be saying, what percentage of the records created were
under
classified?
executive privilege.
We're classified. Those, I don't know what happens to those. And I don't know whether, you could arbitrarily classify something at a very high level when you shouldn't.
If you know Patrick Kennedy, you can.
Right, exactly. So, but anyway, in the first instance, that is what the Little Rock entity was set up to be. It was organized October 23, 1997. The records are very clear. It was an application was put in on December, I want to say 21st or 3rd, 1997 to the IRS, specifically laying it out, saying that's what we're going to do. The form on the IRS, you're supposed to indicate the various purposes. One of the purposes you could have indicated was international, and they did not put it. They said it was an art library, museum, etc. It's just crystal clear.
Yeah.
All right. And the other thing is, you can't in a charity, you can't say, I'm going to create the Ortel Foundation that's going to do a presidential archive and whatever the hell else I want to do.
Right.
You have to limit it.
The scope has to be a tight scope.
It has to be limited. So the problem with the Clinton Foundation is that they went off and did this international work in the name of the Presidential Foundation without registering properly anywhere, letting Bill Clinton get involved, who had had to surrender his law licenses, which is a big problem, not telling people about it, not soliciting properly. That's a set of problems.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
Well, it's a little difficult to do. The battery is running low on the laptop. Let me put it together here, and we'll do this.
Trish, do you have any questions while we're waiting from the audience?
I did, and now I've forgotten it.
Most people have gotten negative comments about Barack Obama.
Well, I have put an AI bot in there to stop that. So
I don't think you're going to need an AI army.
Well,
what's that, Trish?
I remembered. Didn't somehow Obama finagle that he was going not disclosing records around Loretta Lynch's FISA warrants by saying that they're going into his library, which is not yet built?
That's true, and actually I didn't answer the second part of your question about the Barack Obama Foundation, and I'll answer your question. Barack Obama Foundation, its problem is that it is set up to be a presidential library, to hold these records, and to do whatever else he wants to do. So it wasn't appropriately limited in the charter, and they went ahead and they rushed it right through. They gave it the Attorney Generals or whoever gave it the authority to operate. I don't know that it's registered properly everywhere that it's registered. It has solicited, and it's not clear that it's soliciting properly. But they made the very big mistake recently of making an announcement that, on second thought, they're not going to house any presidential records. Well, that guts the whole authority. You received the charter to house the presidential records. You can't now say we're not going to do that. Right? Beautiful
property down along the waterfront there.
Perhaps.
In Chicago. That'd be a pity if you couldn't go in and use that as a librry.
Right. And
there is traditionally in older presidential libraries. I know the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda has lots of traffic. I mean,
it's not my Belinda.
People go there a lot for looking for the Watergate things.
And don't get me wrong on Barack Obama. I think that I think his tenure is atrocious, what he did. I mean, that's just my view from an economic standpoint and from a geopolitical standpoint. But I think that he's a special human being.
Special like riding the short bus?
No.
Sorry?
No, he said special like riding the short bus. That was a
No.
Sorry.
It's a unique and consequential figure in our history. whose life story should be told properly, and he deserves to have the spirit with which I was reaching out to the Obama trustees to say, listen, don't do this to yourselves. You're crippling yourselves here, because once you make these kind of mistakes, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, and there is we just visited Washington, D.C., and we saw the kind of the African American History Museum, and just evaluating the man from his, superficial, he seems very interested in preserving history. He realizes his sense of how important he was to our history as a country. So I would think he would want those records preserved for scholars. I mean, really, it's going to be as important as George Washington or Abraham Lincoln in the long-term look of things.
And actually, one thing that would be interesting, my grandmother came to this country from Portugal. My mother, frankly, came to this as a young girl from Portugal. So I'm a recent product on my maternal line of immigrants. And I think one thing that would be really nice, and I don't know that they would decide to do this, I think to teach the history of America prior to 1492 would be very interesting as well. To not just begin it in 1492, but especially because there were advanced Indian societies, or I like to call them resident societies, in Cahokia, Illinois, right near where he was at Springfield, Illinois. So it would be logical for somebody like Barack Obama, who has this ancestry that's so unusual, and to not tell his story, but also perhaps assemble scholars there to delve back objectively, not one line or another line, but objectively. What was America like?
We're running very low on battery power, so let me give you some of the questions here. YouTuber who goes by the handle Your Brother, who's frequently giving good comments, wants us to ask you, Charles, why do you think Trump has backed down from his original tax plan in which low-income households pay no income tax?
I don't follow that closely. I actually think I believe what the Trump team is trying to do is to come up with a tax system that creates incentives, particularly for the lower strata of society, to work and earn money and keep more of that money. And I believe when you go through the math, if you let the very lowest earning people pay no tax, yes, they have skin in the game because they are paying indirect taxes in terms of Social Security. Every product they buy, they're paying indirect taxes. But it's not the same as my idea, which is to say you have one tax system. I believe that if everyone paid 12.5 cents on each dollar of income from all sources, up to the maximum, that one certain low rate would collect as much income taxes as we currently with this crazy system. But you have to
and get rid of the loopholes.
Get rid of the loopholes.
We'll get as many as we can in the short time.
The other question I want to give you that I think is going to explode your brain and you're going to hate it, GW, is people were talking about the death of JFK Jr. and the impact that this had on Hillary getting a seat in the Senate. And there's a guy by the name of John Hankey who's done some documentaries about the Kennedys and their death. And he presents some pretty suspicious evidence while we're doing a video here about the strange death of Peter Smith. There's a lot of strange details surrounding the death of JFK Jr. in terms of the flight and the evidence surrounding the flight and the CIA getting involved in
I'm sure you don't want to touch that one.
Don't want to touch that.
Well, no, I mean,
that's a question. That's a question.
What I will touch on, though, is I think the manner in which the second inaugural committee, which raised money for the inauguration January 20th, 1997, and started with, I think, 8 or 9 million, almost 9 million of extra money from the first inauguration. There has never, that's a FOIA request I tried and was denied on. I want to see the report on that. How much money did they raise? We have a right to see that. And what did they do with that money? Some of it filtered into the foundation in 1998. But what was that money used for? Was it used to help Hillary, do her listening tour and pre-position to run for Senate and all that? As somebody who has lived a long time in New York, I really resented the whole approach of just letting this carpetbagger come in here and, just give her a Senate seat because, as a consolation prize in my eyes, for, looking the other way on what had happened with Monica Lewinsky. I was unimpressed with that. And so The Kennedy details, I'm certainly not an expert on that. Leave that to you. And
Well, people can check out that John Hankey
Bobby
video.
Kennedy was living in Massachusetts and the senator of New York.
of course, that's how
But
they
I
roll.
mean, you know, I mean,
That's how
it
they
was
roll.
great to be a Kennedy fan. You know, it's
Right.
like we didn't care.
Right.
It's like I don't care.
Charles, would you mind telling us your thoughts on Glass-Steagall legislation and its relevance to today's landscape?
Sure. So in the olden days, when I was involved in investment banking, Glass-Steagall existed, and it was meant to separate the originators of securities from the purchasers of securities. You wanted to, there's a fundamental conflict. You know, when you put those people together, the managers say, "Oh, we can manage this. Don't worry." You know, baloney. You know, there needs to be a lot of tension between, you know, if I want to, you know, sell securities on your behalf, you should be suspicious about whether I'm just, you know, saying you need to sell your stock at $27 a share because I know I could flip it at 35, or whether I've really done my homework. So there needs to be that kind of tension. And the Glass-Steagall bill was promulgated, I think it was signed after the Great Depression in reaction to the crash of 29 through 33, because there had been a similar, albeit much smaller, set of abuses. So the idea was to put these things separate. And I think that was very good. When I was a partner at a very small firm, Dillon Reed, we had to keep our capital inside the firm, and we had to keep our securities accounts inside the firm, and they weren't insured. You know, if things went down, you know, we weren't going to get this money back. And that sharpened and concentrated the mind, right?
Yeah.
You knew it was your money.
Safety net. It was like when you're a trapeze artist.
Right, exactly. And so Dillon Reed was a very, very conservative firm when I was there, and when it was independent. And I'm going to get flack for this, but you know, seldom do I agree with the general direction of the fake Indian senator of Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. But on her tirades concerning that Wall Street needs to be regulated better, I agree it needs to be regulated differently. Most likely not the way she would do it,
Right.
but by forcing the people who are in the business of originating securities to have capital, big capital at risk in their own firms, you know, forcing the traders the same way, you know, when the losses come, they get hit, you know. And going back, frankly, in banking, I was struck while living in the rural areas, when you have these faceless bureaucrats making mortgage decisions, have no clue what that's a bad situation. So I think we went the wrong way with Glass-Steagall.
Charles, we're 12% on the battery,
Okay.
and a viewer that goes by the handle of TheBoy26, always a good question from The Boy. Do you know anything about the DNC convention money left over that was promised to go to Philly?
Well, yeah, I believe that there's work being done now that the ways in which the monies were raised in 2016, and I'm not an expert on election law, but there are WikiLeaks cables that appear to say that the Hillary Clinton campaign promised to send money back to the states that was sent to the DNC to allow donors to give a much higher amount per donor, but that in fact they didn't do that. What they did is they just kept the money for themselves.
This is the Andrew Tobias.
Right.
Yeah, this is your amalgamated bank
You
stuff.
can have $33,000, but we're going to take $32,000 back.
Right.
Yeah, that's all coming. I think we are dying on battery here, and
11%.
the kids are getting restless, so we better let them play. And thank you very much, Charles Ortel.
Thanks so much.
I really appreciate your time.
Really wonderful to have you,
Thank you,
Charles.
Charles.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
We'll
Thank
see you soon.
See you, Trish.
Bye, Trish.
Bye, Trish.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.